Here's something nobody tells you about missing people: they usually come back the way they left, in pieces. Welcome back. Before we get started, I want you to do something for me. Yeah, you, sitting there in the dark wondering if you should be sleeping instead. Dim the lights a little more. The darker the better. Grab whatever you've got nearby: a blanket, a drink, that ancient pillow you refuse to throw away. Get comfortable. Turn on a fan if you want. I'll wait. The fan isn't for the temperature, by the way. It's for the silence. Silence is where your brain fills in all the details we don't say. Here's a question that's going to haunt you for the next 15 minutes. What do you do when the person you're looking for isn't lost? What happens when they're just somewhere else, living a different life, and they don't remember wanting to be found? I'm talking about Margaret Chen. She disappeared on a Tuesday morning in 2009. She was found alive in 2024. The person who found her could barely recognize what she'd become. This is a story about visibility and invisibility. About how someone can vanish in plain sight while the world moves on without noticing. It's about the kind of missing that's so ordinary, so banal, that nobody suspects it's a crime until it's too late. We're going to walk through 15 years together. Not in hours. In minutes. Because time works differently in stories like this. The police treated it like a mystery. The media treated it like a headline. But the person living through it? She was just surviving Tuesday after Tuesday, never knowing which Tuesday would be her last in captivity. If you're new here, stick around. If you've been here before, thank you. Like, subscribe, or comment if you actually enjoy this, not because I'm asking you to, but because you genuinely want to. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Is it your bedroom? Your car? A waiting room somewhere? I want to know. Now. Let's talk about Margaret. Let's talk about the morning she disappeared. Imagine you're the kind of person with a schedule. Not because you're paranoid or obsessive, but because routine is comfort. It's predictability in a world that feels increasingly unpredictable. Margaret Chen was that person. She was 47 years old, worked in accounting, numbers that made sense, unlike people, and lived alone in a modest apartment in suburban Washington state. Her mornings were identical. You could set a clock by them. She'd wake at 6:30 a.m., not because an alarm forced her, but because her body had learned the rhythm. Coffee first. Always the same coffee shop, Brennan's on 5th, corner booth. The barista knew her order before she opened her mouth. Then work by 8:15. Home by 5:45. Dinner prepared by 6:30. Television until 10. Sleep. She had a sister in Portland. Parents who called on Sundays. A coworker she ate lunch with every other Friday. She volunteered at the library on weekends, cataloging books, organizing the world into neat rows. Margaret Chen was not interesting to most people. She was not the type of person you'd expect to vanish. And that's exactly why she was vulnerable. Because here's what nobody tells you about predators: they don't hunt the spectacular. They hunt the routine. They hunt the people whose lives are so predictable that their absence takes time to register. They study the patterns. They watch the mornings. They time the walks. And when Margaret left her apartment on March 14, 2009, at 7:43 a.m., 3 minutes earlier than usual, running late for a dentist appointment, someone was already watching. She made it exactly 3 blocks before her Tuesday became everyone else's unsolved mystery. The dentist called at 8:15 a.m. Margaret wasn't there. She wasn't the type to miss appointments. She called to cancel. She called to confirm. She was the kind of patient dentists actually liked. So when she didn't show up, didn't call, didn't respond to the reminder text message, something small and clinical shifted. By 9 a.m., her co-worker Janet had called her apartment. No answer. By 10 a.m., Janet called her sister. By noon, the sister had called the police. They found her car 3 blocks from her apartment, door hanging open like someone had exited in a hurry, or no hurry at all. Keys still in the ignition. A coffee cup in the cup holder, half full, cold. Her purse was on the front seat, wallet, credit cards, driver's license still inside. Her phone was in the car. Everything that would help someone find her, she left behind. The police file began to fill with observations. No signs of struggle. No blood. No body. No ransom demand. No cryptic letter. Just a void where a person used to be. In cases like this, the first question isn't where. It's who. Who would want Margaret Chen gone? Who would notice she was absent? Who benefits from her disappearance? The answer, to everyone's frustration, was nobody. Nobody benefits from Margaret Chen. She had no enemies. She had no ex-partners with violent histories. She had no debts, no affairs, no secrets that would make sense in a true crime podcast. She had a routine. And then she didn't. News vans appeared by afternoon. Reporters stood in front of her apartment building, practicing their serious faces, delivering the story the way they'd been trained to deliver dozens of other stories. A woman had vanished. She was presumed missing. Police were investigating. If you've seen her, please call this number. The kind of performance that would repeat, then fade. Margaret's photo, a slightly blurry image from her DMV license, the kind everyone hates, would appear on flyers throughout the neighborhood. On telephone poles. On the community Facebook page that nobody checked. On missing person databases that mostly served as digital graveyards for people nobody was still looking for. Search parties are temporary things. People show up for 2 weeks, maybe 3. They walk through nearby forests with dogs and maps, hoping to find a body because a body means closure, means an ending, means you can stop wondering. When no body is found, the energy drains. The volunteers go home. The police move on to active cases. The family members are left alone with their static not knowing. Margaret's parents aged in a particular way. You see it in parents whose children have disappeared, their faces become marked by a specific type of suffering, the kind that compounds over time. Each year that passes without news becomes a stone added to the weight they carry. Her father developed heart problems. Her mother couldn't sleep normally for 5 years. Their daughter existed in an eternal present tense, she is missing. She was last seen. We are still looking. But are they? Really? The police file on Margaret Chen went cold. Not because there was a dramatic failure, not because they hit a wall, but because cold cases are what happens when the initial energy, that flush of attention and resources, inevitably dries up. She became a statistical anomaly in the database. Female. Age 47 at time of disappearance. Missing since March 2009. Status, cold. Her apartment was processed by police, then locked. Her belongings remained inside exactly as she left them: coffee cup on the counter, bed unmade, books on her nightstand waiting for a reader who wouldn't return. Her job was filled by someone else. Her library volunteering slot was reassigned. The world, as it does, adapted to her absence and continued. Years passed. The case was mentioned occasionally in retrospective articles about unsolved disappearances in the Pacific Northwest. Reddit threads speculated. Amateur detectives built theories out of nothing. Was she a runaway? Did she have amnesia? Was she buried somewhere no one had looked yet? Every theory was plausible. None were correct. None were close. Her sister never stopped looking, though. That's the detail that matters. One person, refusing the gravity of cold cases, kept a file. Kept checking databases. Kept a small light on in her house for a missing person who had learned to live in the dark. 15 years later, in a small rural clinic outside Bend, Oregon, a woman arrived complaining of persistent headaches and fragmented memory problems. She had no insurance card. No identification. She paid in cash. She spoke slowly, as though translating from a language she almost remembered. Her name, she said, was Margaret. Just Margaret. Nothing else came clearly. The clinic doctor, a man named Dr. Reeves, ran standard tests. Blood work. Neurological examinations. Everything came back slightly wrong in ways he couldn't quite articulate. Not diseased exactly, but not quite healthy either. Damaged in ways that don't show up on scans. He asked her for emergency contact information. She had none. He asked where she was from. She wasn't sure. He asked for her last name, and she hesitated so long he thought she might not answer at all. When she finally spoke, it was barely audible. Chen. Dr. Reeves was the kind of careful doctor who didn't ignore coincidences. He ran her name through databases. Missing persons. Nothing. Social Security. Nothing. And then, almost as an afterthought, he searched for missing person cases from 15 years ago. Margaret Chen. Washington State. Age 47 at time of disappearance. He found her. He called the police in Washington. He called the family. He called the sister who had never stopped looking, and when she answered the phone and heard that her sister had been found, she didn't believe it at first. Didn't believe it at second either. Belief takes time when the alternative has been the only truth you've lived with for 15 years. The identification was confirmed through dental records, through fingerprints pulled from the old police file, through the small details of a life that had disappeared and somehow reappeared. Margaret Chen had been found. But here's where the story doesn't end like stories are supposed to end. Finding someone isn't the same as recovering them. Alive isn't the same as safe. Being discovered isn't the same as being rescued. Because Margaret, when questioned, didn't want to be found. And she definitely didn't want to go home. What Margaret would eventually tell investigators, in fragmented sessions, with long silences between sentences, was this. She was taken by a man named David Talbot. He approached her car at a red light, forced his way inside, and didn't release her for 7 years. He kept her in a basement. Not a dungeon, that's not the right word. Basements are where people store things, and that's what he did. He stored her. The room had a bed. It had a bathroom. It had a door that locked from the outside. For 7 years, Margaret existed in a space barely larger than a school bus, with a man who oscillated between violence and a strange, distorted intimacy that was its own kind of trauma. But then something shifted. Talbot began letting her leave. Not alone at first. With supervision. Then with rules about where she could go and when. Then, gradually, he loosened the rules. She lived in his house for a while. Then in a basement apartment he controlled. Then in a small rental he paid for, where she was told over and over that the outside world wanted to hurt her. That she was crazy. That she had killed someone before he saved her. That if she left, she'd be arrested. That she was his to keep forever. She believed him. Or believed him enough to not test it. Trauma has a way of rewriting the geography of your mind. The cage becomes comfortable because you've learned every corner. The captor becomes the only person you can trust because they're the only person you see. Over 15 years, Margaret lived in 5 different cities. Always controlled. Always isolated. Always told she was lucky that Talbot kept her. That nobody else wanted her. That the life she had before was a lie. Until one day, something broke. Not Margaret exactly. The situation. Or Talbot's control of it. Details remain unclear. Trauma scrambles memory like eggs. What we know is that Margaret walked into a clinic and asked for help, and the person she had become, the person Talbot had remade her into, was finally willing to be found. The investigation that followed was complicated in ways standard missing person cases are not. Margaret had been found, yes. But she was also still in many ways missing. Her memory of the initial abduction was intact. Her memories of the 15 years were fractured, unreliable, interleaved with false memories that Talbot had constructed and implanted over years of manipulation. Detectives discovered that David Talbot had not been questioned in 2009. He had no connection to Margaret Chen in any database. He was not a neighbor. Not a coworker. Not a family friend. He was a complete cipher, invisible in the timeline, which is how he'd remained free for 15 years. When they finally investigated his residence, they found journals. Hundreds of pages. Documenting Margaret's movements. Her schedule. Her vulnerabilities. Tracking her across 15 years like she was a research project. They found photographs. They found the basement. They found evidence of other women, other abductions, though none as complete as Margaret's, none as long. Some had escaped. Some hadn't. The case became clear at its outline. David Talbot was a predator of unusual patience and precision. Margaret was not his victim. She was his capstone achievement. 15 years of captivity, documented, methodical, absolute. But then came the complication that made the case legally messy. Margaret wasn't sure if she wanted to prosecute him. She had spent 15 years with this man. He had become her entire world. The trauma of separation was almost as violent as the trauma of captivity. Her identity, the one she'd been forced to construct, was entangled with his. To testify against him felt, in some psychological way, like testifying against herself. Detectives worked with trauma specialists. Lawyers worked with Margaret to understand her options. And slowly, she decided to participate in the prosecution. Not for herself. But because she suspected there were other victims. Because she suspected the journals detailed other crimes. Because some part of her, still fractured, still healing, still not entirely sure it was real, wanted to ensure it stopped. David Talbot was convicted on multiple charges including kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and assault. He received a 25-year sentence, which means he will likely die in prison. Justice, in the way we define it, was served. Margaret rebuilt her life in increments so small that rebuilding isn't the right word. It's more like learning to be a person again. A person who wasn't defined by a basement. A person who could make her own coffee and drink it wherever she wanted. A person who could walk outside without permission. But here's the reality nobody mentions in the news reports: she's not the same Margaret who vanished in 2009. That Margaret was erased. The woman who came out of that basement is someone different, scarred differently, shaped differently, broken in specific ways that exact treatments don't quite repair. She works now. She has an apartment. She speaks in therapy about her experiences and the identity she had to construct to survive them. She has reconnected with her sister, though the relationship is careful, tentative. shaped by the fact that they both aged into different people and the time between them feels like a gulf. She doesn't sleep well. The silence bothers her. She prefers noise. The fan in her room runs all night. She's written parts of her story, though not all of it. Some memories are too fragmented. Some are too painful. Some, she's been told by therapists, may never be entirely reliable. The neighborhood where she lived, where her car was found, has changed completely. New families live in those houses. The coffee shop where she had her routine is now a cell phone store. Her job was filled decades ago. The life she had been building is gone, replaced by a different life she didn't choose but has to live anyway. What we do know is that Margaret Chen is alive. She is free. She is recovering in the way people recover from things that shouldn't happen to them. She is learning that survival isn't the same as happiness, but it's a start. There's a particular kind of silence that happens when a story like this ends. Not the silence of resolution exactly. More like the silence of recognition. You've just spent 15 minutes in the dark with a story about a person who spent 15 years in literal darkness. And I wonder if maybe, just maybe, that proximity to someone else's trauma has made the darkness feel a little less comfortable for you. Here's what I want you to take from Margaret's story, and I'll tell you this gently because we're at the end now and I know you're probably thinking about sleep. Survival is not a small thing. It's not a consolation prize. It's not a failure if it's all you can manage. Margaret Chen survived something that was designed to break her. She survived it not because she was stronger than other people, but because her brain learned to adapt. Because some part of her, buried beneath the trauma, refused to disappear entirely. We live in a time when people can vanish for 15 years and the world barely notices. The news cycle turns over. Life continues. Missing becomes forgotten, becomes cold case, becomes historical footnote. But we also live in a time when one person, Margaret's sister, can refuse to accept that silence. Can keep searching. Can be the voice that brings someone back from the dark. That matters. The attention you pay to the people around you matters. The routines you notice matter. The person who seems off, seems controlled, seems like they're living a life that doesn't quite fit them, they matter. We're more visible than we've ever been, and yet we're disappearing more than ever. The paradox of modern life. But we're also more connected. We can search. We can ask questions. We can refuse to move on. So before you turn off the fan and let yourself drift into sleep, do this one thing. Check on someone tomorrow. Not dramatically. Just genuinely. Ask them if they're okay. Ask them if their life is their own. Ask them if they're safe. Most people will say yes and mean it. But somewhere, someone will hesitate just a moment too long, and maybe that hesitation will be heard. Margaret's story ended with her being found. But her story hasn't really ended. It's just shifted into a different chapter, one where she gets to write the sentences again. If you want to hear more stories like this, cases where the missing return changed, where the ending doesn't resolve the way you expect it to, where survival is its own complicated victory, then please stick around. New stories drop every week. Subscribe if you're not already. Comment below and tell me, what's the most meaningful coincidence that's ever happened in your life? Sometimes coincidences are just probability. Sometimes they're the invisible threads that hold reality together. Thank you for being here in the dark with me tonight. Thank you for thinking about Margaret Chen. Thank you for being the kind of person who pays attention to people who are easy to forget. Sleep well. Turn off the fan when you're ready. The darkness will feel different now. I hope it feels a little safer.